Previously, after discovering my stepmother Patricia left me only $1 in Dad's will while she took everything, I learned the truth from a law firm clerk named Kyle. The will was forged. Dad never signed it. Now, armed with the original will and my first piece of evidence, I have to decide my next move. But the anti-contest clause means one wrong step could cost me everything. I sat in my car outside the Coffee Bean for 20 minutes after Kyle left, staring at the two wills on my passenger seat. One showed Dad's real signature, flowing and confident, the way he'd signed everything for 27 years. The other showed a traced imitation, stiff and careful, made by someone who'd practiced but couldn't quite capture his natural hand. Patricia had forged my father's will. I had proof. But proof alone wasn't enough. Not with the anti-contest clause threatening me with $50,000 in penalties if I challenged and lost. I needed more evidence. Undeniable evidence. The kind that would make Patricia's lawyers beg for a settlement instead of going to trial. Which meant I couldn't confront her. Not yet. Not until I had everything documented and ready to file. I started my car and drove to the grocery store. If Patricia thought I was broken and submissive, she'd relax. She'd get comfortable. And comfortable people make mistakes. I bought ingredients for chocolate chip cookies, the kind Patricia always complimented me on at family dinners while insulting everything else about me. The next morning, I showed up at Dad's house with a warm plate of cookies wrapped in plastic wrap and tied with a ribbon. Patricia answered the door in her bathrobe, clearly surprised to see me. Her eyes narrowed slightly, suspicious, but I smiled my warmest smile. "I wanted to thank you," I said, holding out the cookies, "for handling everything with the funeral and the estate. I know it's been hard on you too." She blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, well, that's sweet of you, Megan." She took the cookies, her expression softening. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about all this. Dad would have wanted us to get along," I said, forcing the words past my teeth. "You were important to him." The lie tasted bitter, but I kept smiling. This was strategy. This was patience. This was playing the long game exactly like Dad had taught me when we used to play chess on Sunday afternoons. "Sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece to win the game," he'd always said. Right now I was sacrificing my pride. But I'd win everything else. Patricia invited me inside, chattering about her plans for redecorating. She'd already replaced the living room furniture and was considering knocking down a wall to create an open concept. She talked about Dad's house like it was a renovation project, not a home where he'd lived for 30 years. I nodded and smiled, making supportive comments about her design ideas. I complimented her new curtains. I asked about her yoga studio plans. I played the role of the apologetic daughter who'd accepted her place. And I watched her relax. She offered me tea and we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Dad and I used to have breakfast every Saturday. She dunked one of my cookies in her tea and sighed contentedly. "I'm so relieved you're handling this maturely. Your father worried so much about your emotional state." There it was again. The gaslighting wrapped in concern. But this time I just nodded sympathetically. "I know. I'm working on it." She smiled, completely convinced of her own performance. She thought she'd won. She thought I'd given up. Perfect. Over the next week, I played my role flawlessly. I texted Patricia occasionally with cheerful messages. I asked for her advice about apartment hunting since I'd decided to downsize. I sent her links to yoga equipment for her new studio. I was the perfect, defeated stepdaughter who'd learned her lesson. And while Patricia relaxed into her victory, I worked. I called Mr. Palmer's office and scheduled an appointment to collect some personal keepsakes Dad might have left there. The receptionist was sympathetic and kind, booking me for Thursday afternoon. I hung up and made a list of every document I needed to see, every question I needed answers to, and every piece of evidence I had to gather. The original will Kyle had given me was hidden in a locked box under my bed. I'd photographed every page, saved the images in 3 different cloud accounts, and emailed copies to my personal attorney, a woman I'd hired quietly using money from my business account. Her name was Simone Rivera, and she specialized in estate fraud. When I'd explained my situation, she'd been cautious but interested. "If we can prove forgery, you have a case. But we need undeniable proof." "I'm getting it," I'd told her. Thursday afternoon, I arrived at Dad's law firm carrying an empty tote bag and wearing my most innocent expression. The receptionist greeted me warmly and directed me to Dad's old office, which had been cleared out but still held some boxes of personal items. Kyle appeared in the doorway after a few minutes, glancing nervously down the hallway before slipping inside. "You came back. I needed to see something," I said quietly. "The scheduling log for the day Dad supposedly signed the new will. Can you access that?" He hesitated, his face torn between fear and moral obligation. Finally, he pulled out his phone and opened an app. "The firm uses digital scheduling. Every appointment gets logged automatically." He scrolled through dates, then stopped. "Here. 2 months ago. The date on that will." He showed me the screen. The calendar for that day showed multiple appointments, meetings, calls, court appearances. But the entry for Thomas Brooks' will signing had a red line through it and a note, "Cancelled, client hospitalized." The meeting had never happened. "Can you send me a screenshot?" asked, my heart pounding. Kyle looked around nervously, then quickly forwarded the screenshot to my email before deleting it from his sent folder. "If anyone finds out." "No one will find out," I promised. "This stays between us." He nodded and left quickly. I stayed in the office for 30 more minutes, sorting through Dad's boxes and taking a few framed photos and his favorite coffee mug. I had to maintain the appearance of someone collecting keepsakes, not evidence. But that scheduling log was gold. The meeting where Dad supposedly signed his will had been cancelled because he was in the hospital. Yet the will was dated that exact day, signed with his name, witnessed by people who couldn't have been there. Patricia had made a mistake. Big one. I drove to a parking lot and sat in my car, pulling out my laptop. I opened the digital copy of the forged will that Mr. Palmer had emailed to all the beneficiaries. Every document has metadata. Hidden information about when it was created, modified, and printed. I opened the will's properties and started digging through the metadata. Most people don't know that PDFs store information about the device that created them. Printer models, computer usernames, timestamps, all buried in code most people never see. The forged will showed it was created 2 days before Dad died. Not 2 months ago when it was supposedly signed. 2 days before his death, when he was already unconscious in hospice care. More importantly, the document properties showed it had been printed on a Canon Pixma printer, model TR8620. That wasn't the law firm's printer. They used commercial Xerox machines with completely different identifiers. I pulled up the photos I'd taken at Dad's house before Patricia changed the locks. There, in the home office, sitting on the desk beside her laptop, was a Canon Pixma TR8620. She had printed the forged will at home. My hands were shaking as I photographed my laptop screen showing the metadata. This was proof. Actual, technical proof that the document had been created at home, not at the law firm. I needed one more piece of evidence to make the case undeniable. Medical records. If I could prove Dad was physically incapable of signing anything on the date listed, the forgery would be impossible to dispute. I called Dad's hospital and explained I needed copies of his medical records for estate purposes. They told me it would take up to 10 business days to process the request. I paid the fee over the phone and gave them my email address for delivery. "Can you include nursing notes and vital signs for the last 3 months of his care?" "Yes. Everything you have." "Of course, Miss Brooks. We're very sorry for your loss." 10 business days felt like forever, but I forced myself to be patient. Evidence gathered carefully was evidence that would hold up in court. I couldn't rush this and risk making mistakes that Patricia could exploit. In the meantime, I continued my friendly stepdaughter routine. I texted Patricia about a farmer's market I thought she'd enjoy. I sent her an article about grief yoga. I remained consistently pleasant, consistently submissive, consistently non-threatening. 2 weeks after the funeral, Patricia called me sounding breathless and excited. "Megan, I'm doing some spring cleaning. Would you like Dad's old truck? I'm thinking of selling it, but I wanted to give you first choice." Dad's truck. The Ford F-150 he'd driven for 15 years, that he'd taught me to drive in, that still had his favorite radio stations programmed. She was selling it. "How much?" asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Oh, I'm not asking you to pay. Consider it a gift. I know money's tight for you right now." The condescension dripped through the phone. She wanted me to feel grateful for being offered something that should have been mine anyway. "That's really generous, Patricia. But I don't have anywhere to park a truck. You should sell it. If you're sure. I have someone interested who'll pay cash." 3 days later, I saw the truck listed on Facebook Marketplace for $18,000. Sold within hours. Patricia had needed money fast enough to sell Dad's beloved truck for quick cash instead of getting it properly appraised and holding out for a better price. The truck was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia liquidated everything she could quickly convert to cash. Dad's tools, which he'd collected over decades, sold to a contractor for a fraction of their value. His golf clubs pawned. His vintage record collection, listed online. I watched it happen from a distance, tracking the sales through online listings and checking the house when I visited to pick up mail. Each time I came over, more things were missing. The antique clock from the hallway. The paintings from the dining room. The leather recliner from his study. Patricia was burning through Dad's belongings like she needed money urgently. But why? She'd inherited $3.2 million according to the will. Why sell everything so desperately? I started researching. I pulled Dad's property records from the county assessor's website. The property tax payment, which Dad had always paid in January, was overdue. Patricia hadn't paid it. A late fee had been assessed. If it went unpaid for another month, a lien would be filed. Why would someone with millions in inheritance let a $5,000 property tax bill go unpaid? I dug deeper. I checked court records for any lawsuits or liens. Nothing. I checked bankruptcy filings. Nothing. But then I remembered something Dad had mentioned once. Patricia had debt from before their marriage. Credit cards, he'd said. She'd been working on paying them down. I subscribed to a public records database and ran Patricia's name. The results made my breath catch. She had 17 credit cards, almost all of them maxed out. Total debt. Nearly $200,000. There were also 2 car loans with missed payments, a personal loan from a predatory lender charging 30% interest, and 3 collections notices from medical bills. Patricia wasn't wealthy. She was drowning in debt. The $3.2 million from Dad's estate would save her. But estates take time to settle. Probate takes months, sometimes a year. And while she waited for that money, her debts kept growing, interest compounding, collectors calling. She needed cash now. That's why she was selling everything. That's why she'd forged the will in the first place. Not out of greed alone, but out of desperation. Understanding Patricia's motive made everything click into place. She hadn't planned this carefully. She'd acted out of panic, making mistakes someone calmer would have avoided. The metadata. The cancelled appointment. The obvious forgery in Dad's signature. She'd rushed because she was desperate, and desperation made people sloppy. I got the call from the hospital on a Tuesday morning. My email dinged with a notification. Medical records request completed. I opened my laptop so fast I nearly knocked over my coffee. The PDF was 247 pages long. I scrolled to the dates in question, the 2 months before Dad died, particularly the day the forged will was supposedly signed. I found the nursing notes for that date. Patient unresponsive. Pain management protocol administered at 0800. No lucid periods observed. Family present. Comfort care continued. I read it 3 more times to make sure I understood. Unresponsive. No lucid periods. He couldn't have signed anything because he was unconscious. There were witnesses, nurses, documented every 4 hours, confirming his condition. Kept reading. The week before that date was the same. The week after was the same. For the entire 2 months covered by the forged will's date, Dad had maybe 6 hours total of lucid consciousness, all of them while medicated and witnessed by medical staff who noted he was confused and disoriented. There was no possible way he could have reviewed legal documents, understood their contents, and signed them with a steady hand. I photographed every relevant page. The nursing notes. The medication logs showing morphine doses that would have made complex thought impossible. The doctor's assessments noting decreased cognitive function and limited awareness. This was it. This was the undeniable proof. Patricia couldn't explain away medical records from a hospital. She couldn't claim Dad had a miraculous moment of clarity that just happened to coincide with signing a will that benefited her exclusively. Called Simone my attorney. I have everything. Scheduling logs showing the meeting was cancelled. Metadata proving the document was created at home. Medical records proving he was unconscious. It's all documented. Email me everything, she said, her voice sharp with professional interest. I'll review it tonight. That evening, I organized all my evidence into a single folder. Scheduling logs, metadata analysis, medical records, photos of Dad's signature compared to the forgery, Patricia's financial records showing motive, and Kyle's testimony in a written statement he'd signed and had notarized. I had built a case that would demolish Patricia's forged will. But I couldn't file it yet. The anti-contest clause meant one shot. If I challenged the will and lost, I'd owe $50,000 I didn't have. I needed to be absolutely certain before I moved. Simone called me back at 9 p.m. Megan, this is solid. Very solid. The medical records alone would probably be enough, but combined with the metadata and the scheduling logs, this will crumble in court. What about the anti-contest clause? That clause is only enforceable if your challenge is frivolous or made in bad faith. You have documented evidence of fraud. A judge will throw out that clause immediately. Patricia's lawyers will know that. They'll probably settle rather than go to trial. How long until we can file? I need 2 weeks to prepare the paperwork. The case needs to be airtight. While Simone prepared the legal documents, I continued playing my role. I visited Patricia twice more, bringing her soup and asking about her redecorating plans. She showed me paint swatches for the master bedroom and complained about how expensive granite countertops were. The estate funds are taking forever to clear, she said, sighing dramatically. Probate is such a nightmare. I had no idea it would take this long. How long? I asked innocently. At least 6 more months, they're saying. Maybe longer if there are any complications. She stirred her soup absently. I'm thinking of taking out a loan against the house value to cover some immediate expenses. She was going to borrow money using Dad's house as collateral. More debt to pile on top of the debt she already couldn't manage. The desperation was getting worse. That sounds stressful, I said sympathetically. Is there anything I can do to help? Oh, you're sweet, but no. I'll figure it out. I always do. She patted my hand like I was a child offering to help with adult problems. I smiled and finished my soup, thinking about how that condescending pat would feel very different in 2 weeks. On Friday, Patricia posted on Facebook about a garage sale. Downsizing. Everything must go. This weekend only. The post showed photos of Dad's belongings spread across the lawn like merchandise at a swap meet. I drove past the house on Saturday morning. Strangers picked through his things, haggling over prices. His workbench sold for $40. His fishing gear for $25. His leather jacket, the one he'd worn for 15 years, for $15 to a teenager who probably thought it looked vintage. I wanted to stop the car and buy everything, to rescue his belongings from being scattered to strangers. But I forced myself to keep driving. Material possessions didn't matter. What mattered was justice and truth. I couldn't let emotion derail my strategy now, not when I was so close. That afternoon, Patricia posted again. Successful sale. Thank you, everyone. She'd made maybe $3,000 total, selling items worth 10 times that. The desperation was becoming reckless. I screenshotted everything and added it to my evidence folder under a section labeled Financial Desperation, Motive. Monday morning I got a notification from the bank monitoring service I'd set up. One of Dad's old accounts, a small savings account at a credit union he rarely used, had been accessed. Patricia had found it and withdrawn the entire balance, $42,000. I wasn't surprised she'd found that account. Dad had kept a list of all his financial accounts in a notebook in his office drawer. What did surprise me was that she'd missed one. 3 years ago, Dad had opened an account at a small local bank for what he called his emergency fund. He'd never added it to his master list because he wanted it completely separate, known only to him. He told me about it over breakfast one Saturday, making me memorize the account number and password. If something happens to me, you go to Riverside Community Bank and ask for account number 8847. Password is your mother's maiden name plus my birth year. That money is yours, emergency only. I'd forgotten about it until now. Probably because it had seemed unnecessary. Dad was healthy then and I had my own savings. But now I pulled out my old journal where I'd written the information and checked my records. Tuesday morning, I walked into Riverside Community Bank and asked to speak to someone about account 8847. The banker, a kind older woman named Mrs. Chen, pulled up the records. "Are you Megan Brooks?" she asked. "Yes. Your father left instructions that you're authorized on this account. Let me pull up the details." She typed for a moment, then her eyebrows rose. "Oh my. He's been making automatic deposits for years. The current balance is..." She turned the screen toward me. The balance showed $127,000. My breath caught. Dad had been quietly moving money into this account for years, probably as a safety net for me. And Patricia had no idea it existed because he'd never recorded it anywhere she could find. "What would you like to do with the account?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Transfer it to my personal bank. All of it. Today." My voice was steady despite the hammering of my heart. "And I need documentation showing the account history. Every deposit, every date, everything." She nodded and started processing the paperwork. 20 minutes later, I walked out with a cashier's check for $127,000 and a complete account history showing Dad's deposits dating back 5 years. That money changed everything. With it, I could afford legal fees without worrying. I could pay the anti-contest penalty if somehow things went wrong, though Simone assured me they wouldn't. I could fight Patricia without fear of financial ruin. More importantly, the account history proved Dad's intentions. He'd been consistently saving money specifically for me, depositing funds every month even after he married Patricia. The pattern showed clear intent to provide for his daughter regardless of his wife's presence. I added the account documentation to my evidence folder. Then I called Simone. "I found another account. Proves ongoing intent to provide for me. Plus, I now have enough money to cover any legal costs and the anti-contest penalty if needed. Perfect. I'm finishing the filing paperwork this week. We'll submit everything Monday. Are you ready for this?" Was I ready? Ready to challenge Patricia directly, to take her to court, to risk everything on the evidence I'd gathered? Ready to stand up in front of judges and lawyers and prove that my stepmother had forged my father's will? "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm ready." The weekend before the filing, I did something I'd been avoiding. I visited Dad's grave. The headstone had been placed 2 weeks earlier, simple granite with his name, dates, and a quote Patricia had chosen: "Loving husband, devoted father." At least she'd gotten that part right, even if she'd lied about everything else. I sat on the grass beside the grave and talked to him like I used to during our Saturday breakfasts. I told him about the forged will, about Patricia's desperation, about the evidence I'd gathered. I told him about the secret account he'd left me and how it proved what I already knew, that he'd never have left me with nothing. "I'm going to fix this, Dad," I said quietly. "I'm going to make sure your real wishes are honored. Not for the money, though that matters. But because Patricia doesn't get to rewrite history. She doesn't get to pretend you wanted this." The wind rustled through the trees. A bird sang somewhere nearby. I sat there for an hour, feeling peaceful for the first time since he'd died. When I finally stood to leave, I noticed something. Fresh flowers on the grave, not from me. I checked the card. Miss you every day. Love, M. Patricia hadn't left flowers. She'd been too busy selling his belongings. But I had. And I would keep coming, long after she'd forgotten him entirely. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. I dressed carefully in a navy suit. Professional, serious, unshakable. I met Simone at the courthouse at 9 a.m. She carried a briefcase thick with documentation. Last chance to back out, she said, though her expression said she knew I wouldn't. File it. We walked into the probate office together. Simone handed the clerk our petition. Challenge to will based on fraud, forgery, and undue influence. The clerk stamped it, logged it into the system, and handed us a copy. The respondent will be served within 48 hours, she said. First hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. We walked out into the sunshine. Somewhere across town, Patricia was probably shopping or planning her next renovation, completely unaware that her world was about to implode. What happens now? I asked. Now. Simone smiled grimly. Now we wait for her to panic. People who've committed fraud always panic when they're caught. She'll make mistakes, reach out to you, maybe try to settle. Whatever she does, document everything. Record calls if it's legal in your state. Save all texts and emails. And if she doesn't panic, then we go to court in 3 weeks and bury her with evidence. Simone patted her briefcase. Either way, you've already won. She just doesn't know it yet. I looked up at the courthouse, thinking about Dad, about justice, about the long game I'd played perfectly while Patricia thought I was beaten. She'd called me weak. She'd called me emotional. She'd assumed I'd accept defeat quietly. She'd been wrong about all of it. And in 3 weeks, the whole world would know exactly how wrong she'd been. What happened next changed everything. Don't miss the next episode.